Have you always just syndicated in Utah?
No, I've got, actually, I started
Oh, that's right.
syndicating
Yeah.
2 years ago. I've been in 24 total syndications, 4 of them in Utah, 20 outside. Most of them, South Carolina is the state where I've had, most of the other syndications. And I want to say we had 9 properties in South Carolina, 2 in Georgia, 1 in North Carolina.
God, I was in all those markets when I was at Real Source.
And I mean, some of those markets, were really popular. A lot of money flooded there, but
we got a lot of our money.
Management is just a whole different ball of wax. I mean, we had 2 properties in Augusta. We only have 1 there now, but poverty rate in Augusta is like 23%. Salt Lake City poverty rate's 7%. And so when you start looking at, little things like collections and evictions.
Yeah, and you're at a lower cost of living.
Lower cost of living.
So, and then you drop that down to the poverty rate.
Exactly.
And it's not a lot of money.
Not a lot of money. And so, one of the challenges we're having on our Augusta property is, about 50% of the people that apply can't qualify to rent. They don't have the income, they don't have, the background, rental history that you want. So, and we were seeing the same thing in South Carolina. I mean, the communities we were in, poverty rate there was 15 to 20, statewide, it's about that. So I didn't realize how big of a difference that would make. But, here in Salt Lake, poverty rate in Utah is around 5 to 7%. So, 1/3 of what it is outside or in that southeast area. But, we do get a very high percentage of qualified renters. We don't get very many people that show up and, can't qualify. So,
yeah, it's interesting. I never invested in Salt Lake, even though I've lived here.
Yep.
Pretty much my whole life. And the reason I didn't is because everything is so predictable, so stable, and there's so much money that wants to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for the reasons you talked about. It was just the standard of living is very high here. Education levels are very high here, and there is a lot of wealth here that just wants to stay trapped here. Mm-hmm. So I was always amazed when I saw what you're doing down in South Salt Lake. I was just like, how did you guys buy those properties at that price? Because what kept us out of the market, and we need to go, but we were doing like investment grade, B plus or A, 150, 200 unit complexes. We could never afford to get in this market. Yeah. And yet you found something, you found the proverbial needle in the haystack with affordable in Salt Lake.
Yeah. It is different. And I mean, I was literally just at a lunch, a group called Powderland, and they emphasize this a couple of times that you made mention money wants to stay here, but there's 5 or 6 families that control over half the real estate in the state. Commercial real estate is probably more than half. I don't know what the number is, but
I went to school with 2 of them.
Yeah, and most of the families were represented at that luncheon that I went to today. But it's kind of interesting, just kind of how that plays out. And these are generational families that have been doing this for years and years and years. And so there is a little bit of, maybe a little bit of intimidation trying to come into here. And a lot of people were like, yeah, you're going to have a tough time breaking in. But, I think, maybe part of it is just, my military background. It's like, I can break in, I can break in. That's one thing I, in a very different context, learned how to do. There's 2 properties in the portfolio. One of them was a gentleman who was retiring, who had managed his own property for 30 years. It's the only commercial multifamily property he had. I don't think he knew what it was worth. I know he didn't know what it was worth, because when he first listed it, he was listing it as, what you would sell a 4-plex for multiplied by 6, and multifamily doesn't work like that. When I first saw the property, he was listing it at like $6.5 million. He was using a residential real estate agent. The residential real estate agent didn't know what it was worth either. I think my words to him is, he's smoking crack if he thinks he's going to get $6.5 million for that property. A year and a half later, we bought it for $4.5 million. Which ended up being a really good deal.
Yeah.
But,
That's a substantial discount.
Realistically, the property was probably worth closer to 5. We were the beneficiaries of 2 other groups who came in. One of them had the property under contract at 6.3. One of them had the property under contract at 5.6. After their due diligence and, talking to lenders and everything else, both of those groups backed out. We had competitive bids with both of those groups. Our numbers were, I think our first offer was at 5.2. We ended up getting it under contract at 4.8. And then after we had it under contract, got the price down to 4.5. That was a needle in a haystack, kind of the perfect situation. I mean, if either of those 2 groups could have closed, we never would have got that deal. That's the smaller of the 2. The larger of the 2 is just market timing as well. Very similar situation. The group that previously owned it, like a lot of groups, they had a variable rate loan and they got pinched. Only so much time on their loan term. They had somebody get the deal under contract. What the broker told us is they couldn't get lending lined up like they wanted to. Once again, we were competing with that first buyer. They fell out and the broker picked up the phone, called me and said, "Hey, this one's available." He called me like 2 days after we put the offer in on Blair Street, the smaller one. I pulled that back up. I looked at the address and like, oh my gosh, these things are 4 blocks away from each other. And that's
so they almost could be managed like one property.
They are, yeah, and we do.
Yeah, so that's brilliant.
We've been talking to our property manager about doing this for a while. We have 125 units in Salt Lake. One of them's downtown, but we just finally got our property manager to give us 1 leasing agent over all 3 properties.
Nice.
We used to have 3 different leasing agents, for 4 properties. So we got that pared down. We now have single leasing agent only working our properties too. They're just a proximity of 3 properties, and from north to south, they're all right off of 30 East, probably 5 miles, 5 miles between all 3.
Great location too. Yeah. Love that location. This first time outside of these little investments. My wife has made rental properties like the odd condominium here, duplex there. This is the first time I've owned multifamily in Utah. I've owned tens of thousands of units. Yeah, through RealSource and the sponsor work we did there. But I've never owned in Salt Lake before, and I'm thrilled about it. Yeah, so thanks for letting me in on this thing.
No problem.
But so we probably got to be getting pretty close to getting this funded and being done with it. Yep. If there was somebody that wanted to get invested in this, well, how would they get involved in it? I mean, I got introduced to you through pre-iShare, which was fortunate, and I get a chance to look at all the deals out there, and I immediately jumped on yours like a hungry kid on a Hershey bar, because I know the market here so well, and I know that area so well.
Oh, and that area is a great area. Well, I mean, how to get involved? It starts with a call. We want to make sure this is the right investment opportunity for people who are coming in.
So important.
It is very absolutely crucial. We want to make sure that it's the right type of investment for the people who are coming in. That helps us. It helps the investors as well. We want to make sure that they're comfortable with us. That's
the most important thing.
Yeah.
On that liquidity thing, obviously, pre-iShare, that's what they're doing is bringing liquidity to the limited partnership interest. Yep. Which that's a game changer.
It is, absolutely.
When I was syndicating, people used to always say to me, I would get great referrals from my existing investor database that I'd been working with. These guys I'd worked with some of them for 20 years. They'd send me a referral, and they'd say, "Well, God, you've done such a great job for Ethan. Just tell me, about how do I get invested?" And you go through the process with them. Then you say. And this was back when all we were doing is 506Bs. Right. And you had to have that prior relationship. I'd say one of the things I got to inform you is if you need to get out of this thing early, I give them an approximate date that I thought we'd be selling, because our disposition cycles were always based on market conditions. And so we didn't have any fixed dates. But if you need to get out of this, Ethan, I got to tell you, your options either sell it back to me, and that's a conflict of interest. I'm going to disclose that to you right up front. Yep. And I'll probably give you what you got into it, or you can sell it, and it might have been worth quite a bit more, or you can sell it to somebody that's already in the deal, or somebody I know. That's all the options we got.
And there's limitations. I mean, just because of how SEC sets things up, we can't just bring anybody in. They're not typically marketable, which
and you still got to approve them and the suitability and all of that. And 506C's got some leniency, but some of the state laws are still kind of draconian.
Correct.
But and you got to kind of be aware of that. But the great news is that out of those guys I was talking to that were referred to me, 7 out of 10 would back away because I don't know, Mike. I like what I'm hearing, but I might need my money in 3 years.
Yeah. And something that happens a lot is, we'll start talking to somebody over, for example, the South Salt Lake portfolio deal. And, for some people, it takes a while to get comfortable with us. A lot of times what happens is it's no on the first deal and we keep talking, and maybe it's 6 months from now, maybe it's a year later, but very frequently we start the conversation over 6 months to a year later on a different project is when, investments are actually made. We have to be comfortable with each other. It is, 3, 5, sometimes 10-year horizons, depending on the deals we're doing. Outside of pre-iShare service, there's limited liquidity events. It's like a marriage of some sorts where we're in this together for 5 or 10 years. So there has to be a comfort level there.
Absolutely.
We want people to understand the deal. Hey, when are the expected returns? Understand why we like the deal so that there's fewer questions later. We'd rather have somebody come in knowing everything. Once those two things are taken care of, they're comfortable with us. They know the deal. From there, it's easy. A couple papers to sign.
Yeah, sadly, a lot of times I just think that people don't read the full PPM.
They don't.
And I wish they would. And part of that, because it talks a lot about in a PPM about who the sponsor is.
Yep.
Now, one of the things I love about my investment with you is I've gotten to know you.
Yeah.
And first off, right off the bat, you're ex-military, so thank you for your service. Sure. And what I love about military guys is they're very regimented. They've got a plan in mind, and then they got a backup plan and a backup plan to that plan.
Yep.
And I see all of that in you. But if people don't take the time to read the PPM and get the background of the sponsor and so forth, or I know you've done a video with pre-iShare where you talk about your background. But it takes that getting to a little bit of time, and that's one-on-one time on the phone. And I would encourage anybody that's interested in this project, and everybody should be, they really should spend a little bit of time with you and get to know you. Yeah. I know you've been really patient. I've sent some of my old investors to you, and they always come back and say, yeah, he's a great guy. He just took time with us. We got a good sense of who he is, and also your team, and that's critical too, is that is who's actually going to be, the, as you would say, the boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And so that, I wish people would just take that time. Rather than talking about jumping right into the investment, take a little bit of time to get to know each other, because you're going to be married to each other for, even with liquidity these days, no one really makes that investment unless they really intend to stay with it.
Right.
And most of my investors towards the end, it's like, they weren't concerned about liquidity. It's just like, don't give me my money back. I got to go find a 1031.
Keep it working.
Yeah, I got to, just leave it parked. But new investors to this, especially younger investors where they've got kids that are maybe coming to college age or something like that. Yeah. They need to control their cash, but they also need to know who's in control of their cash.
Correct. And I mean, a lot of people, one of the benefits of real estate is talking about, different phases of life. There's some people that are looking for cash flow from investments. We do a lot of value adds, and so they're not super cash flow strong. That's part of getting to know the sponsor, and something that I'm very careful with. If somebody comes to me, I'll ask them, why are you doing this investment? And if they come to me and say, because we're looking for cash flow, I'm very happy to point them somewhere else. And for people who are in the Salt Lake area, we try to do monthly events where we invite investors out. Last month, we were at Top Golf with a bunch of investors, some who have invested with us, some who are looking to invest with us as well. This month in May, we're actually going to go to an axe throwing place, and we've invited a bunch of investors to that as well. So we try to make it easy to get to know us. Obviously, wherever you're at in the world. We can hop on a Zoom call. For anybody who's local, it's a lot easier to get to know you because we're all in the same area. And we have fun too.
Well, you're a pretty easy guy to get to know.
Yeah.
This is the first time you and I met face to face.
Face to face, correct. Yeah.
Which is, I'm glad that happened. It happened just because we were in proximity of each other. I happen to live here in Salt Lake myself, but I got a good feel for you on the Zoom calls.
Yeah.
You were very honest with me. You were very transparent. And what I love about it is that I never once felt like I was being sold, in the whole process.
Yeah.
I felt like you were interviewing me as much as I was interviewing you, make sure that this is going to be a good matchup. And so that can be done. You can get it done on a Zoom call. I know, because I did with you, and it worked. So that's good. So they should set a time with you, get to know you, get comfortable with you, and then you can talk about the investment. Yep. And I can vouch for the investment. Like I said, I've got my own money into it now. Yeah. You got anything else on the horizon? Because I kind of think you're one of those rising stars here. And
our goal is 2 or 3 acquisitions per year is what we're trying to do. We did close a small property a month and a half ago. The way this one came up is we had just closed on White Pines, and this one came across our desk. It was actually in a very similar situation. It's one that we had made an offer on probably a year and a half before. The broker basically gave me the opportunity. He's like, you got 2 weeks to get an offer in. Otherwise, I'm taking it to market. I mean, we just closed on South Salt Lake, and we're still raising. That was too good of an opportunity to pass up. I mean, quite frankly, we'd probably be done with the South Salt Lake raise by now if we didn't jump on that. 27 units up Davis County, probably about 25 miles north of Salt Lake. Next acquisition, will probably be late summer is kind of what we have that penciled in, which means late summer is when we'll start looking again and try to get another acquisition in mid to late fall this year. Cool. Always looking, but we don't want to get ahead of our skis either. We don't want to. But you're pretty much done with your raise. In fact, you've closed on these properties. Correct. Yeah. That's what I loved about it. That was the other thing I loved is I wasn't buying a pro forma. Right. I wasn't buying performance. Now, you've got a lot of things where you're doing value add, and I'll see greater performance on those properties. But to me, it was like, wow, it's seldom do you get a chance. It's like, we're not familiar with the property. We've done our due diligence. Here's the market conditions. We think it's going to do this. We know what it's doing. Yeah. Yeah. And on White Pines, we came in with roughly a $500,000 renovation budget. We spent $400,000. Most of the projects are done. New roof, new decks, replaced a whole lot of asphalt. We put up self-storage units. I think those have been really popular. Big plus. Yeah. So it's a brilliant spend at CapEx. Yeah. We put up 28 storage units, 9 foot by 6 foot. So these are fairly large storage units. We're renting them out at $50 a pop. Salt Lake's sitting at about a 5.2, 5.3 cap rate. We're looking at about $350,000, $400,000 in value that we've added, and it only cost us $100,000. So that's a multiple of that cap rate. Exactly. So I mean that's CapEx very well spent. Yeah, very well spent. Making the asphalt black and getting rid of potholes. It's harder to point to where that helps you, but it definitely does. It's a little harder to pull the string and say, this is exactly what we're doing. Well, I think where that's really important is that I've learned, because I've syndicated multifamily for 35 years or something like that, 30 years. The landscaping, which everybody goes, well, that's not really a true value add because you're not going to get more rent for it. But you might get a little bit more, but what you do get is you get them in the door when they come to lease. Right. Because what we learned early on, about 80 to 95% of the decision-making process is what you see when you pull into the drive of that property. And it's like, I don't think I want to live here. You don't even get that chance to get them in the door. Basically curb appeal. Yeah. Because my wife, I'd be driving the car most of the time. My wife would see a place coming up and she would say, Brian, don't even stop. That's my point. Yeah. And that's when you said that, that's exactly what I started thinking of, is her saying, Brian, don't even stop, you know? So
Yeah.
what I've learned from my wife on that is, if we keep the exterior, if we keep the parking lot black, you know, the landscaping done well, we're going to attract a slightly better tenant.
And even though it's a cosmetic thing, and as I was listening to you talk about that, and me saying, well, that doesn't really add much in the revenue stream. I was thinking of a guy named Mike Case, who was in Oklahoma City. And he had bought, I think also in Tulsa, but he kept buying these C-grade complexes. They were about 100-unit complexes, or maybe a little bigger, a little smaller. You could always recognize his property. First of all, the sign was always a great big red cube. And it said Case Properties on it, and then it had the information on that. But what he would do is he bought 70s and 80s vintage properties. And if it had red shag carpet in it, Formica countertops, didn't change any of that. Just cleaned things up a little bit, you know, but he didn't change any of that. But he dumped a fortune into the outside, the curb appeal into the property. And they would say, oh, yeah, I'm, you know, down at Rustling Pines. And they say, oh, that's a new development that Mike Case just did, didn't he? You know, because the property was so fresh from the exterior. And he could raise the rent. Now, keep in mind, this is like early 90s. He could raise the rent by $200 a unit.
Wow.
Just by the fact that the curb appeal was so strong, everybody was proud to live there.
And that's a lot now. I mean, $200 per unit.
Yeah.
If I could get that multiple, I'd do that every day. So,
I mean, but he specialized in doing just that. I mean, his units inside were clean and fresh. He'd paint them and stuff like that. But, you know, if the carpet wasn't worn out, but it was that, you know, that disco red shag, I mean, it stayed.
Yeah.
You know, the countertops, usually he wouldn't redo the Formica, but he might re-enamel them. Once you were in the door, everybody thought, God, you lived in the greatest project on the block, but they didn't realize that when, you know, they closed the doors, they were standing on red shag carpet. But from the community point of view, wow, that's a nice place.
And what we're most likely going to have is a off-leash dog area, you know, fenced. Bench on the inside where owners can sit, let their dogs run around, and then a little playground. Almost every time I'm at that property, I see, you know, a mother with young kids. We want that to be a space where people can congregate.
Well, and a dog park is one of the most unifying community things you can ever do. Yeah. Because you all sit around the park bench and watch your dogs, you know, and that said, I can't tell you how many times we've changed over tennis courts into dog parks. And now for some reason, the big thing is pickleball. You know, everybody seems to be headed that way. But the dog park was always the most significant improvement we could add to any community. Yeah. Because that's part of the family, you know, and that's how you unify a community, is through everybody's dogs.
Yeah. It's one of the cheapest CapEx things that you can do. You know?
Absolutely.
You put up a chain link fence, you put a bench in, and you put one of those little poles with the doggy bags in. $15,000. It's right in line with those self-storage units as far as bang for the buck.
And it broadens your tenant base too.
You know, $50 to $75 per month is about what we're charging. That adds to our revenue as well. If that's the deciding factor for them, that's a win for us as well. Why we are still raising money, we have about $250,000 in planned renovations at Blair Street as well. We are only doing exterior work at Blair Street. The interiors look nice. We're going to give it a facelift. We're going to paint everything. We're going to put some landscaping in, seal coat the parking lot again. Interiors right now are fabulous. And it's on a really quiet street. It already has self-storage, 1 per unit already. What I like doing on properties like this is we let the investors vote on what the rebranding is going to look like. And we'll put it out to the investors.
That's a great idea.